Hello there and welcome to another episode of 4Tims in a Podcast. It is myself, Darren, that's on today. It's an episode that we promised this time last year when Ange was announced. If you were listening to us back then, you would remember that we had Adrian Deans on, who is the chief football analyst on the Australian FTBL site, and he's also the author of Mr. Clean Sheets, which is a popular football/crime novel over there. So if you remember, Adrian kindly came on about just under 12 months ago to give us a bit more information about Ange, who he was and what we could expect from him, and we promised to revisit it a year later to see how much had came to fruition and just to basically catch up and see how Celtic season went. And of course, if you're listening to it, you'd know how loved Ange is and how successful this season has been. So Adrian, thank you very much for coming back on. It has been 12 months since you were last on, and you made some pretty big statements about Ange back then, about how well you thought he'd do and what he would bring to Celtic. And I was listening to the episode last night just to sort of refresh my memory, and overwhelmingly most of them came true. Ange has been a massive success for Celtic and the fans absolutely love him. How have you seen the last 12 months through the eyes of an Australian?
Well, thanks, Darren. It has been an amazing season for Celtic. I've absolutely loved watching it. Mind you, I watch most Celtic seasons, but I watched it with a little bit more interest this year, I dare say, because of Ange. Although the biggest call I made was that, well, probably the biggest call I made was that Ange could go on to be regarded as one of the great Celtic managers. He's already being talked about, amongst the fans as one of the great Celtic managers. So Ange himself probably wouldn't regard himself, along those lines just yet. He's achieved pretty fantastic season. It was no surprise at all that he was going to be successful, because he's always successful everywhere he goes, and now that includes Celtic. He was successful more quickly than I expected, and in a better way than I expected. But that just goes to show the measure of the man. He's an unbelievable football manager, and I'm really hoping that he stays at Celtic for a little bit longer yet to go on and get more success.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very much the hope from Celtic fans over here as well. I know there's been some talk that they may already be looking to give him a contract extension. I know he's on a 12-month rolling deal just now, but we'll just go back to the start. Once Ange did come in, I don't think it took very long for Celtic fans to get on board. Like, as we spoke about, I said that once you're appointed, Celtic fans will always give anyone a chance. But I think Ange's initial impact was very much positive in terms of he done a media conference with the mainstream media and then one directly after with the fan media. And I think straight away a lot of fans took to him because he was very open and honest. Like, you had some of the mainstream media try catch him out and ask him if he thought he was second choice or because Eddie Howe deal hadn't went through, and I think Ange just sort of batted it away and says, I don't know if I'm second, third, fourth or fifth choice, I'm here now. And I think Celtic fans appreciated the fact that he was dealing with the media that way. And then early on there was a mic'd up training session that Celtic released on their YouTube and Celtic TV, and became the sort of mantra of this season is that we don't stop, and that was Ange's sort of philosophy even in training, and it sort of bear fruit. How did you see the start of the season for Celtic? Obviously we went out of the Champions League qualifiers to Midtjylland and then lost 3 of our first 6 games all away from home. Was there any part of you that was worried? Because I know a few Celtic fans were sort of getting a bit worried after the first 6 games of the league.
Yeah, well, I watched the whole season quite closely. I did say that he has in the past taken a little bit of time for his methods to bed down in various clubs. His usual practice was always to walk in, rip out the deadwood, and then impose this very high octane style upon the players who remain, and also to bring in some players that can play that style. And I note that almost the first 2 players that he brought in were Kyogo and Abada, who were Kyogo in particular became a huge fan favourite, and demonstrated to the fans that Ange had a real eye for a player, especially for the kind of player who could play his system. I note also, he didn't so much rip out the deadwood this time. The deadwood had already decided to go all by itself. And, when he was asked about that, he just consistently said, I only want to deal with players who want to be here. So let's not worry about the players who want away. But yeah, he did his usual thing. The deadwood departed for the most part. He brought in some good players able to play his system, and he enthused the players who remained with the kind of football that he wanted them to play, I think Callum McGregor in particular has had a fabulous season, and he turns out to be exactly the right kind of player for the Ange system. Probably jumping ahead a bit, but if you remember the game against Rangers, I think it was at home. It was at home, and Celtic won 3-0.
Yeah, that was the home game in February.
Yeah. If you saw the way Callum McGregor broke out of the huddle before the game, you just knew absolutely he was up for it and he was going to have one hell of a game, and he did. And boy, that was one of the most enjoyable matches I've watched in a really long time. But that was, really shows you that that was the full impact of Ange ball on display in that first half, and Rangers just couldn't cope with it. They couldn't get anywhere near Celtic that day.
Yeah, definitely. I know that was a highlight for a lot of fans, because that was obviously the first time that we went top of the league under Ange, and it was the first time that we had beat Rangers in 2 years. So it was a monumental night, and as you say, that first half was just incredible. Like I've been a season ticket holder for about 20 years now, and like there's nothing that really comes close. I don't know if it was the fact it was like 100% Celtic fans there was no away support. It was like a midweek game underneath the lights, and everything was just, as you say, it was a sort of culmination and vindication of Ange and everything he'd been working towards. And yeah, it was, as you say, Cal McGregor's been absolutely pivotal for him this season. Like, it was always going to be a tough ask to replace Scott Brown as Celtic captain, but I feel that Cal McGregor has really stood up to that, and not only just been a great captain but been a great player. He's obviously won the Player of the Year award over here as well, so I think Cal McGregor's just an absolutely fantastic footballer. And he, after Scotland had played in the Euros, he scored them one of the games. There was some talk that people were a bit worried that maybe Brendan Rodgers at Leicester or somebody else down south might come in and try and get Cal McGregor, but I think obviously the conversations that Ange had with Callum, I'd like to think helped make McGregor's mind up, and he's been a pivotal part of the Celtic squad for years, but even more so as captain now. But yeah, as you mentioned, like, Kyogo was obviously Ange's one of his first signings, and like the first half of the season was just absolutely incredible. And I feel that for a lot of the faith that the fans had in Ange was sort of repaid in the fact that they seen Kyogo as he was Ange's man, and he was the one that he brought over from Japan, and he was so pivotal. I think that sort of had fans behind Ange, because we made quite a few signings because we needed to in terms of the amount of players that had left. But when there was fans who'd questioned at the time, guys like Joe Hart and James McCarthy and even Abada, who had a great season, there was sort of, like, Celtic had a lot of dealings with Abada's agent, so people were sort of questioning whether or not he was an Ange signing. But I think that the one thing about Ange's recruitment is that there doesn't really seem to be a signing that's sort of missed. Like, some would argue that James McCarthy's not really lived up to what some people would have thought, but apart from that, I think his recruitment's been spot on. And do you believe as well that like, I know we brought in Kyogo, and then in the January we brought another 3 Japanese players in. Do you think that sort of showed what Ange is all about, and he's bringing these players in? And a lot of people seem to see it as a lot of faith from the board, that they've trusted Ange to go out and get his own men. Like, because I know before Ange came in, people wanted a director of football and a head of recruitment, but Ange seems to have been the man that's been running everything this season.
And he's on record for saying that that's what he loves doing. He loves having his hands on all parts of the football department. And I think, one of the things that I suggested at our last discussion was that possibly an attraction for the board would have been Ange's knowledge of other leagues, where he would be able to get players that did not cost what British clubs would usually have to pay. And you see, like a sterling example of that with Kyogo in particular, but also Hatate has had some really fantastic matches. Maeda is an absolute machine in terms of his unrelenting. I almost feel that Maeda would rather the other team have the ball, because he's such a terrier. He just loves closing them down and putting them under pressure and getting them to make mistakes and winning the ball back in dangerous places. He's been fabulous. Although, if his finishing was a bit better, then Maeda would probably be playing for Barcelona. And of course, we haven't really seen what's his name, Itaguchi, the other player. Has he played at all?
Yeah, he played in the cup. I think it was against Alloa that we were up against, and he got quite nasty ankle injury, and he's not sort of been seen since. I know he came off the bench in the last game against Motherwell, but I think that ankle injury really set him back.
Yeah, but you saw what Ange did all over. When it comes to recruitment, he's brought in pretty much a whole new team, and it's only the really good players from before, like your McGregors, who have stayed in the team amongst all these brand new outstandingly good players, and of course Tommy Rogic has stayed in the team. I was very interested in the impact that Ange had on players like Anthony Ralston and to a lesser extent Greg Taylor, because I think Ralston had some absolutely amazing matches, and you think last year he was a fan joke. Everybody was talking about him as like one of the worst players ever to pull on the hoops, and couldn't wait to see the back of him. And yet halfway through this season, with Ange's coaching, he's almost become like one of the fans' favourite players. It's just that he's up against Juranovic, yet another new Ange signing, and you talk about players like Juranovic and Kyogo and to a lesser extent O'Reilly. These are guys that Ange has identified, who can really play his system. I'm expecting that in the summer he'll bring in another, hopefully Juranovic level player on the left that Taylor is going to have to really, really pull his socks up if he's ever going to get a match. I suspect that Ange will. Just to talk more generally about what's going to happen this summer, at least the way I see it, I expect that he will once again get rid of some deadwood. There's a lot of players on the books that Celtic frankly don't need. Like your Ajetis and your Barkases and probably half a dozen others. If he can find places for those so that he can get their salaries off the books, that would be great. I'd be very interested in seeing promotion for a couple of the academy lads. I'm very, very interested in Bosun Lawal. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. Have you seen him, Darren? Have you seen him play?
Play a few games for the B team. He's been, as soon as he signed, there was a lot of hype about him when he signed because he'd come up from down south and was very highly rated. But I think they've just sort of gave him a season in the B team to sort of just maybe get to grips and just for a bit of leadership in that B team. But I don't know if he's someone we might see a bit more of, because there's a bit of a palaver going on just now with the B team. It doesn't look like they're going to play in the Lowland League in Scotland next season just because of sort of issue that's come up, but that should be decided. But I know he has been highly spoken about.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I would like to see the likes of him promoted, but if not, go out on loan to another Scottish team, or where he's going to get some minutes and develop a bit more quickly. Everything I've seen of him, I've seen some highlights of him in the academy, and he's far too good for that level of football. There's some others down there that are not bad. I quite like the look of Vata and Brooks, and I wouldn't mind seeing the goalkeeper, Oluwayemi, is that his name, get some games in the pre-season. For the first team. He needs to be tested, and maybe if he's not going to push Joe Hart, I don't think Barkas or Bain are going to push Joe Hart, but maybe Oluwayemi could. I've only seen a little bit of him, but he looks very capable and very confident. So, Hart is at the age where he needs to be mentoring somebody, who is eventually going to take his spot, unless he just gets replaced by another top-level goalkeeper. But on top of that, I think we're also going to see Ange spend some of the Champions League money. I would like to think, and I'm sure that this is the case, that everybody's contract at the club, as especially first-team players, is going to mean that they would have got some sort of bonus or pay rise for making the Champions League. And the way Ange builds teams, he needs everybody to be happy and all for one and one for all, and knows us all pointed in the same direction. The last thing he needs is there being like champagne Charlies in the change room, who are going to piss everybody off, and jealousy amongst players because some guys are on significantly higher wages than others and that sort of thing. I very much think it will be Ange's style to not pay over the odds for really good quality players. He'll probably dip back into Asia. he might dip into Eastern Europe or Scandinavia, or yet another youth player like O'Reilly or Lawal from one of the, maybe League One or Championship sort of sides in England. You might remember that in our very first discussion, I tipped Riley McGree as a player who would really suit the Ange system. I was really disappointed that he got so close to coming to Celtic and then didn't come. And you've probably not spent much time lurking on the Middlesbrough boards, Darren, but I have in recent times, and those fans could not be speaking more highly of Riley McGree. I saw a fan say the other day on their forum, if only we'd got McGree earlier, we'd be a much better chance of promotion if that had happened. And they love him to bits. I suspect we got O'Reilly instead of McGree after McGree didn't come. I'm not sure of the timing, but probably quite similar players, but just that McGree's a bit older and a little bit more the finished product. I think Ange will be going for more of that level player. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he gets another. I really want him to get a really strong defensive midfielder who could maybe free up Callum McGregor to go a little bit further up the park and certainly take the defensive pressure off him a little. I'd like to see another winger, and I'd like to see another creative 10. So if he could get a left back, and I really, really want to see Carter Vickers and Jota signed permanently for Celtic. I really hope that happens. Looking at Jota after the Motherwell game, he looked really happy, and I thought his body language was suggestive of the fact that he wanted to stay. Carter Vickers was much more enigmatic. I hope he stays, but his agent's probably fielding all sorts of offers, so he'll have some thinking to do.
I think for both of them, the reports over here seem to be pretty promising. Like every day now, it seems that there's another outlet reporting that Jota looks like it's going to happen, and the Carter Vickers one, there was talk the other day that he had agreed personal terms and it was just a case of getting the deal done. I think there's been reports that we've got until June the 15th to get the Carter Vickers deal done, but both look like they are in. Like, I know it's easy to say this, but they, as you say, they, like Jota especially, looked like he was loving it on the last day, and I know that Jota, Carter Vickers, Stephen Welsh and Carol Starfelt, among a few others, they all went to Ibiza together after it, so there's obviously a good bond there as well. And just like having the Champions League group stages confirmed, like not having to worry about qualifiers, that's got to strengthen our position as well. I was going to bring up Riley McGree. It was sort of one that I heard last night, and I realised that you're about 6 months ahead of the curve in terms of Celtic going for him. Do you think that was just a case of Riley being more interested in getting himself towards the Premier League, or because it did seem like it was very close to happening? And I think possibly the only reason that Celtic fans aren't as disappointed is because, as you say, we got Matt O'Reilly instead by all accounts, and Matt O'Reilly was one of our better players when he came in, so I think it was disappointing at the time. But yeah, what do you put that down to?
It's difficult to say. McGree himself is reported to have said that you got to remember that here in Australia we grow up and pretty much the EPL is the only thing we see on telly when it comes to European football. Obviously, things have improved a lot, over the last 10, 15 years, and there's a lot more choice available. But there's this deep inculcation of Australian football fans to mainly the EPL because of just what's available on telly. And Riley would have grown up with that himself, despite having a Scottish name. So for him to be pursued at the last minute by a club that had a chance of promotion to the EPL probably was just a little bit too overwhelming for him. I understand he'd already had discussions with Ange and was quite excited by the idea of playing for Ange, as any young player ought to be. It's a big shame that he would have been an absolute sensation at Celtic, I think. I think O'Reilly is a really good player, and he is probably going to be, he's still got a lot of development to do and is going to be probably a really fantastic player. I just say that right now McGree is probably a better player, but he's a bit older. I think he's 23 and he's had a bit more experience at a better level. But never mind. There'll be others. I understand. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Ange dip into some slightly more obscure leagues for next year? Like, I understand he's been tracking an Iranian striker, but the Iranian league is a really tough league. They've got some really fabulous players, and Iran tend to be the top-ranked country. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him bring someone over from there. Any number of other Japanese or Australian or Korean players he could bring in that would be super cheap by Scottish standards. The new kid lighting up the Australian leagues, a young kid called Garang Kawal, who's of Sudanese ancestry, who he just played in an exhibition game of the A-League All-Stars versus Barcelona the other night, and just absolutely jaw-dropping performance for a 17-year-old. He twice ran right through the half of the Barcelona team and should have scored 2 goals, hit the post, just missed with another shot, and just mesmerising runs, slaloming through these players so fast, just such a wonderful young player. There's probably going to be a huge bidding war for him, but Ange could do much worse than bring him on board if that was possible. But I think I expect that it'll be Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, and Asia where Ange will bring in some very, very strong quality players for. I doubt he will pay more than £5 million for anybody.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. As you say, we've been linked with quite a few players from far afield. We've had links with an Argentinian left back, as you say, an Iranian. There's been another left back who's playing in Scandinavia, and even the Ferencváros striker that we came up against this season we were linked with yesterday as well. But very interesting to see where we do go, because I think it looks like Ange is trying to get these deals sort of done as soon as possible. That's something that Celtic sort of, I don't know if it's been down to the fact that we've had qualifiers, but they've sort of been a bit slow in their business, and it's been towards the end of windows that we've got deals done. Like, saying if you even look at last season's transfer window, like we went into the qualifiers without guys like Jota and Carter Vickers, who signed pretty close to the deadline. So I think they'll hopefully get the people they need on board. Just on player development, someone you mentioned, it was Anthony Ralston, and I don't think there was a Celtic fan, maybe apart from his friends and family, that thought he had a future at Celtic this time last year, because he had made his debut under Brendan Rodgers and then sort of disappeared into the wilderness. He had a few loans at St Johnstone and Dundee United where he didn't make much of an impact, and I think because his contract was ending, most people just assumed that he was going to move on. Like, have you ever seen that and sort of revitalise a player in that way? Because as I say, there was absolutely nothing in the last few years that would have suggested that Ralston would have had a future at Celtic, but then he obviously went on to make, I think it was 45 appearances this season, contributed a lot of goals and assists, and even got a Scotland call-up. Have you ever seen Ange transform a player like that?
Oh, yeah. I think Ange has done that quite regularly throughout his career. There are certain players who just respond to particular coaches in particular ways, and they find their best. Ange's, especially, you look at he's very much a promoter of youth, always has been. You look at for example, the first Brisbane team that he had, and he got rid of all the deadwood, some significantly older players, who'd already had big careers and were sitting there on big salaries at Brisbane and dominating the dressing room. He got rid of them, and then other younger players had to emerge and take on the responsibilities. And there were a number of players in that Brisbane team who just were completely new players as to how well they played. One of them became he kind of divided the fans over here, but he went on to become a Socceroo and a long-term. I remember him playing for Ange's Socceroos against Spain, and having an unbelievably good game, and he was a nothing player before Ange came in. He very much inspires young players, and those who respond to his methods, like Ralston, suddenly look like a completely different player.
Yeah, it's definitely been something that's impressed, and Ralston got a longer term deal early in the season as well, just to sort of reward him for that. So it was something that definitely been one of the highlights of this season for Ange. When we spoke last, you said by the time we get to about Christmas that you'd be able to sort of see where this Ange team was going. By the time we got to Christmas, Celtic were, I think, 6 points behind the league, but after the start we made, that wasn't a disaster by any means. Plus, we had won the League Cup against Hibs, winning the final 2-1 with Kyogo getting a double. How important do you think that League Cup was for Ange in terms of sort of like a tangible bit of success that he could show, and just sort of how did you see the team in the first half of the season?
Well, obviously there were some teething difficulties as the players got to grips with Ange's style. You got to remember also that for part of that first part of the season, he still had people in the team like Odsonne Edouard and Ryan Christie, who clearly didn't want to be here at Celtic. And I mean, you think about that first Glasgow derby game where Edward missed that absolute sitter from a couple of yards out, in the first 5 or 10 minutes. He scores that goal. It's potentially a completely different result and a really different first half of the season. It's on these tiny little margins that football entire campaigns sometimes are decided. And he actually, I don't know, I probably shouldn't say this, but it looked to me as though he wasn't even trying when he got that chance. But he didn't want to be there. And where'd he go? Crystal Palace. And he's had quite a good season, I think, for Crystal Palace. Christie, imagine having people like Christie and Nitcham and Edward in the dressing room and trying to pull the club together. It must have been such a difficult assignment for Ange, but he's always said that whilst somebody's on the books of his club, he's going to treat them like anybody else, and he did, potentially to his detriment. But people like Edward are very good players, and you don't know what you're going to get with them when they walk out on the pitch, because they've got their own particular agendas sometimes. But somehow Ange got through that very rocky period, and fortunately, once the more toxic personalities were gone, we saw the real Ange team start to emerge, and people like McGregor, really started to find their feet. Within the team. Kyogo, had a massive impact, on that first half of the season. He got those goals, when he was under an injury cloud in that League Cup final. What was it? His second goal, the lob? Was that the second goal? Was that did that win goal of the season? I thought I heard somebody say that he'd won goal of the season with that. But it started to become Ange's team by that time. And I think winning that League Cup trophy must have been absolutely massive for Ange personally. It must have been a huge sigh of relief for the fans, like seeing some silverware back in the cabinet. And I think everybody must have, just sort of been given a huge shot in the arm by that result. And then there was a bit of a COVID scare in January. There was a bit of a delay in the mid-season break was extended or something, or brought forward. I'm not sure. Is that right?
Yeah, it got brought forward. So there was a sort of mini lockdown imposed in Scotland, and so every club but one in our league voted to bring the winter break that was already scheduled, to bring it forward to give fans a better chance of being back in the ground, because the Scottish Government had limited it to 500 fans. So they brought that forward, and our last game was the game against St Johnstone on Boxing Day before the break, and there was a whole load of conspiracies from the other side who says it was because Celtic were missing guys like Kyogo and that they'd get their signings in, and I don't know, it just sort of it was a funny few weeks, because obviously a few weeks later we did get back in, and guys like Daisen Maeda and Rio Hatate made their debut against Hibs on that Monday night it was that we started back with a full crowd. But yeah, I think that sort of that break in between did sort of give fans time to sort of assess where we were and where we would need to be if we wanted to win the league. And plus, as I say, Celtic, I think they announced the 3 Japanese signings on the 31st of December, so it did give Celtic a chance to get some signings in.
Yeah, and then they were quite Hatate in particular, as we said earlier, was critical in that Glasgow derby game when it came. I can understand the conspiracy theories from the blue half of Glasgow. I think it probably did turn out to Celtic's benefit that there was a delay there, and that was a really, really important game. I think the psychological impact on Rangers must have been enormous, after, they were just totally blown off the park that night. And that may not have happened if the game had been played a month earlier. But anyway, it's you'd need a time machine and Stephen Hawking to help you with an alternative view of the universe to work out whether that would have been different.
Yeah, definitely. It was obviously a pivotal game, as I say. It was I think it was on the Saturday that they dropped points up at Ross County in the last minute, and then Celtic scored the last minute winner of their own way, Abada, against Dundee United, and it meant that they would have the chance to go into that game on Wednesday with a chance to go top of the league. Because I remember I was in the post-match press conference, and that was all Ange got asked about after the Dundee United game. But he had been pretty consistent in his message. Like, you had people in sort of September and October from like the BBC and Sky Sports sort of asking Ange about the title race, and Ange was sort of swatting it away, telling them, I was told the title race was finished, and it was always consistent about not looking at league titles. But how was there a point in the season that you, like we've asked this to a lot of Celtic fans, but was there a point in the season that you thought that Celtic would go on to win the league? Because I know at the start of the season, the Celtics fans' expectations were sort of on the floor after the mess we'd been left in. I think everybody sort of, like, the League Cup was great to win, but there was a lot of people who didn't expect Celtic to win anything last season.
Well, you might remember from our last conversation, I did say that I believed that Ange would be successful. I did think that he would be there or thereabouts in the league. If I were to identify a single moment when I thought that when I was confident that Celtic would win the league, it was that moment I described earlier when you saw Callum McGregor wearing his mask, I think, for the first time, explode out of that team huddle just before that amazing night at Parkhead. I thought, in that moment, I thought, yep, Celtic are going to win this game. They're going to go top, and they're going to really steamroll the rest of the season. I felt that if Celtic got to 4 points ahead at any point, that Rangers might collapse, but Rangers, to their credit, I suppose, did not collapse. And on any objective view, they had quite a successful season, like making the final of Europa and winning the Scottish Cup. Their fans will probably be looking at the fact that they came second in the league, and that's for them just not good enough. But and so Celtic fans are going to be basking in all summer in the fact that they are champions. But I'm from an outsider perspective, I'm very happy to see Rangers doing well in Europe, because it speaks volumes about the level of Scottish football and the level of Celtic's own achievement in beating Rangers for the league. They've beaten a team that, and like Celtic could well themselves, have been on Rangers' journey in Europe, for the Europa League. That was, I think there was quite a lot of bad luck in the European run, and to come up against Bodo Glimt at that time, boy, they're a good team. That's why I was talking about, like maybe looking at some Scandinavian players to bring into the Ange system. I'm surprised that they didn't go a little bit further themselves in the Europa League, because they're a really, really good team.
How did you view Europe as a whole for Ange? Obviously, when we spoke, you said that Ange would sort of, not like, obviously we're in the Champions League now. When you were speaking about Celtic possibly going into the Champions League, you were speaking about how Ange would maybe look at it as to how far he could go. Like, obviously, like our Europa League campaign, like, as much as we get eliminated to the Conference League, like, it was I know most people think it was a decent group stage. Like, I think apart from the 4-0 Leverkusen defeat at home, like, we were in a winning position in every game. We also beat Ferencváros twice, beat Betis at home, and the away games against Leverkusen and Betis, we were winning early, and Betis and winning about 20 minutes to go in Leverkusen as well. I know the Bodo game was it's one that sort of divides some fans, because the home game was obviously, like, Bodo were a very good team and deserved a win that night. But the second leg, it was a very much a change side that Ange played. There was quite a few changes, and a lot of people sort of thought that it looked like Celtic had given up on the tie and had one look to. We went to Easter Road to play Hibs on the Sunday. So I think that sort of divided fans who thought we maybe should have went full strength there and tried to get back in the tie. What was your view on Europe as a whole for Ange?
Some of the games that you mentioned were kind of why I was talking about some bad luck. I think Celtic could easily have done better, certainly got out of the group in Europa. As for that second leg against Bodo, it's difficult to say because Ange is always saying that he will never put out a second quality team. You know, he will always put out the best team that he has available to him. And for all we know, he did. There may have been injury niggles or something that forced his hand a bit in that second leg. We'll never know. I prefer to believe that Ange, would have given it his best shot if he could, because Europe to him is so important. It's one of the things that I said in our first conversation, that Ange would have come to Celtic not just looking at the league. Obviously, the league is all important in terms of getting into Europe, and also it's very important for the fans to be number one in the league. But his personal view, and I maintain this is still the case, would be his personal focus will be on Europe. He will have seen his appointment to Celtic as the opportunity for him to really show on the world stage his quality. And I think that what you're going to see over summer is him building for a really serious tilt at Europe next time. I think he's going to be really looking for players like those Bodo Glimt players, that who were just machines. They were like football robots that just played this high octane style, very like the Ange style. It's just that they got us on the night. He will be looking for more of those sorts of players. He will be instilling his system. The players have had a year to get used to him. The system will be much more ingrained next time. And his focus will totally be on Europe. You might remember from our last conversation that when he was the Australian national team coach, he won the Asian Cup with a fairly much more conservative shape and system than he typically uses these days. It was pretty much 4-2-3-1, and he was reliant on the quality of the players rather than the system. But he obviously thought to himself after that, well, this is fine for Asia, but how do we go into the World Cup and hope to make some kind of a dent in that tournament against the very best teams in the world? And that was when he really changed his own personal system. He already had aspects of his system like the high octane press and that sort of thing, fast ball movement, but it was the shape that changed after that. He went to a kind of 3-4 or 3-5-2, I think it was, for the Australian national team, and that was all about getting more attackers into the front half of the pitch. I'm not suggesting that he's going to make that kind of change now for Celtic, because he's very, very relaxed with his sort of mainly 4-3-3 sort of shape, and very reliant also on those fast attacking fullbacks that sort of like kind of turn it into a 2-2-3-3 sort of shape to some extent, as they with the ball as they go up the pitch, and they kind of tend to be 4-4-2 without the ball. But I think he's going to be looking for players, as he'll be looking for a revolution more in the personnel, I think, this time than the shape and system, because he's really refined his shape and system now. He knows it works. He just needs plan A to be done better. And I think for plan A to be done better, that mostly means better players. And for him to have a full pre-season with the players he's already got, the best of the players he's already got, plus the 3 to 4 super high quality new players I expect him to bring in, I think the fans can really seriously anticipate a more comfortable result in the league this time, and going awfully close to getting out of the group in the Champions League.
Yeah, here's hoping. I know in terms of shape, there's been talk in the last few weeks about how Ange will manage his strikers next season, because obviously Kyogo and Giakoumakis both missed large parts of the season. Giakoumakis missed most of the first half of the season, and Kyogo missed 4 months from December to about April, May time. Do you think that there would be any way he would sort of look to accommodate both in the team, or do you think he'll just stick to his 4-3-3 and go with one? I know Kyogo has at times played out wide, but Ange just spoken about how he felt that was a mistake when he played him out wide at Ibrox and so on.
Well, Kyogo played most of his football, I think, in Japan out wide, and was awfully effective out there. So we know he can do it. Ange might well, he has changed in the past. Not often, maybe only once. But he might spring a surprise and play them together, in something like a 3-5-2 or even a 4-4-2. I don't know. I think given the number of games that Celtic are going to have, and the number of really important games that Celtic are going to have, especially in the first half of the season, I think it's more likely that he'll rotate the two, where they'll both get minutes most games, presuming they stay fit. But I think there'll be another one in there as well. I think he'll bring in another out-and-out striker, to enhance his choices up front and force the players to fight even harder to get minutes on the park. As I said, he's known to have been watching an Iranian striker for a while, but God knows who else he's got on his list. I said at our first conversation that Ange would have had a list of Asian players that he could use in his system, and he would also have a list of Euro players. I mean, I don't know the extent to which he got any help from people like Mark Lawwell previously. But Ange certainly came good on that list in Asia when you think of the people that he brought in. But he also brought in some right cracking players, from Europe, with especially Juranovic. But Abada's still very young. I expect him to develop. Jota was a fantastic player. And he brought in some British players as well, like your CCVs, your Joe Harts. Joe Hart was possibly the most important signing of the whole season, and of course young O'Reilly. Really looking for, and there's others that he's brought in as well that we haven't really seen yet. Some of the younger ones like Lowell. Liam Scales was an Ange signing, wasn't he?
That's another contentious one because Dermot Desmond has quite a significant interest in, I think it's that Shamrock we signed Liam Scales from, and it was
right.
So there's sort of people questioning that one as well. He's not played too much. I think the last time he maybe played was in the Bodo away game.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you're going to see, as I said, mostly a better Plan A in Europe this year, and with some better players to apply the system. I think it's going to be, as he said, this is just phase one. He's just getting started. I think phase two is going to be even more exciting, and I think you're going to see some pretty spectacular football from Celtic in season 2 under Ange.
Here's hoping. And just before we start to wrap up, one man that I can't not ask about, because he won't be part of season 2 under Ange, is Tom Rogic, who this time last year again was someone that was very much quoted as, because he'd worked with Ange, like people just assumed that Ange would get the best of him, but it very much proved to be the case. And I know for a lot of people, they believed that this was Rogic's best season at Celtic over his 9 years. And what did you make of Rogic this season and just his Celtic career in general? It's obviously, it was sort of sprung on Celtic fans. I think most people thought he had a year on his deal left and just assumed he would stay, but it seems like it's been a sort of option, and both the club and the player have agreed for him to go. And I know Celtic fans are absolutely heartbroken by it. What have you made of Rogic? Oh,
he's always been one of my favourite players. I mean, he started his career at Central Coast Mariners, which is my local club here in Australia. I absolutely loved him from day one. He's always been an absolute joy to watch. He's been fabulous for Celtic. Obviously, he's had his share of injuries over the years. He's been a bit of a fragile sort of player a lot of the time, but was not remotely surprised that Ange got totally the best out of him. He looked like a completely rejuvenated player and pulled off some masterful moments this year. Looked fitter than he had been for years. I was quite surprised when I recently discovered that it was not very well known in Scotland that Rogic almost signed for Arsenal in about 2016, I think it was.
Yeah, when you emailed me that was news to me as well.
It was quite well known in Australia, but I happen to know his ex-director of football at the Mariners and his ex-club captain at the Mariners very well, and it was in the news here that there was speculation in the news that he was maybe going to Arsenal, and when you think about it, he's very much an Arsene Wenger type player. Wenger does really go for pace, but he loves technique, or loved. Back in those days, but the word from my contacts was that it was very likely to happen, and then it was a bit of a mystery that he suddenly turned around at the last minute and re-signed a long deal for Celtic. The only thing I can suspect is that he wouldn't have got any sort of guarantee from Wenger that he was going to play, and he might have looked at the other players in his position, including people like Mesut Ozil at the time, and thought, it's going to be pretty hard for me to get into that team. And I understand he really loves Glasgow, so it would have been a wrench to move from there as well. I don't know where he's going to go. I expect that you've got to remember that in Asia, he's a very famous player because Australia's a big team in Asia, and Rogic has been one of our better players for the last 8-10 years. And so he will probably go to one of the petrodollar leagues and make enough money so that he never has to work again. And I guess good luck to him.
Yeah, definitely. He goes with everybody at Celtic's well wishes. I know everybody was sort of caught up when he gets subbed against Motherwell, and he was overcome by emotion. He's been a fantastic Celtic player and he'll be very much missed. But just before we wrap up, obviously last year I asked you how Celtic were seen in Australia, and you spoke about how big they were. They're coming to Australia in about 6 months' time. Are you going to be going to that? And is that sort of testament to how popular Ange is? Like, I know there was a lot of sort of controversy over here just because it was supposedly going to be a friendly with Celtic and Rangers, but obviously they've pulled out now, so it should be a more joyous affair.
Well, I've got tickets to the game, and it hasn't been announced yet exactly who they're going to be playing instead of Rangers. I was completely aware of the controversy both amongst the Celtic and the Rangers fans about they felt quite humiliated about being invited along as second fiddle to Ange's homecoming celebration. But the fact that they pulled out, it might cost them a hell of a lot of money. They're obviously going to get sued by the promoters because, but I suppose it would depend to some extent on whether all the Rangers fans that bought tickets for a start, they're going to be wanting their money back. And so you'd say that that's approximately half the crowd, probably less than half the crowd, because I would say that Celtic are a better supported club in Australia than Rangers. But because Ange has been involved with Celtic this year, their profile has been much higher than usual. Quite regularly see Celtic feature on the sports news these days in Australia, and lots of talk about Ange and his success. And amongst my own friends, for example, I grew up. I grew up in a Catholic household, so Celtic were always going to be the club that I kind of followed in Scotland. But since Viduka and McDonald were there, I sort of developed a much stronger interest in Celtic. And then Tommy Rogic went there, I became a genuine fan of Celtic. And then when Ange went, that was sort of like the icing on the cake. And amongst all my football following friends, everyone's become a Celtic fan. Every time we get together, the first thing we do is talk about how Ange is going and how Celtic are going, and there'd be a detailed analysis of every game, similar to what you might see in plenty of pubs in Glasgow. But that's the kind of impact Ange has had. Celtic were always a big followed club in Australia, but they are much bigger with Ange. And I don't know how long Ange will stay. The likelihood is that his agent has been getting offers already from a whole bunch of places. But Ange is the sort of person I think he's always going to be loyal whilst he feels supported and whilst he feels that he still has a project to work on. His Celtic project is very far from completed, I would imagine. And so as long as he feels supported by the club, by the players and by the fans, I think he will stay. I'd expect him to be there at least another 2 years. The worry will be that some hugely cashed up club comes in and offers him ridiculous money that is going to just profoundly change the life of him and his family. He is, 56, so he doesn't have that much longer at the top. If an offer comes in like that, it might be very hard for him to say no, because he is first and foremost. He's a husband and a father, and everybody's heard him talk about his father and how important family is to him. So he'll want to provide for his family. There are clubs that can massively outbid Celtic when it comes to that sort of thing. So the hope is that it doesn't happen. It'll probably happen one day, but the hope is it doesn't happen yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think Celtic fans are sort of well versed in players and managers leaving for bigger sums of money. But we'll just enjoy Ange while he's here, and I think we'll wrap up there. It's been about an hour we've been talking, so it's been great to catch up. And just a reminder that if you want to hear more from Adrian, or he is the chief football analyst on the Australian FTBL site, I'll put the link in the description. And he's also the author of Mr. Clean Sheets, which is a football/crime novel, so I'll put a link in for that as well. But Adrian, thank you very much for coming on, and I'll hopefully speak to you soon when the Celtics are celebrating yet more success under Ange.
Absolute pleasure, Darren. Anytime.